Tonight is a different service than what we usually do because I want to share a report to give an accounting of what I have been doing the last month because I think that's important. But let me start by sharing some scripture with you, lest you think that sabbatical is a foolish idea. It was something that God established. In Leviticus chapter 25, God spoke to Moses and said on Mount Sinai, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land in which I give you, the land that is yours, you shall keep a Sabbath to the Lord. 6 years you shall sow your fields, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather its fruit. But in the 7th year there shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to the Lord. You shall neither sow your field nor prune your vineyard." Verse 8, when you count 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years, the time of 7 Sabbaths of years has been completed. In other words, 49 years have gone by. Then you shall cause the trumpet of Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the day of atonement, and you shall declare and proclaim this 50th year liberty through all the land to all of its inhabitants. For it shall be to you a year of Jubilee, and you shall each one return his possessions to its previous owner. God established the Sabbath for a time of rest. 7 days in a week, 6 you work, the 7th you rest. 7 years, 6 you work the land, the 7th you rest. 7 groups of 7 years, 49 years in total, the next year you rest. The land does no work, no harvesting. You give back possessions that maybe you have gotten because of interest being paid or whatever. God knew that there was a need for a time of rest. And so this church established a sabbatical process. About the time I came, maybe they were working on it a little bit before I came. But nonetheless, this has been my 4th sabbatical. Now, the first sabbatical I had was spent on the Isle of Holden. John spent his on the Isle of Patmos. I spent my first sabbatical on the Isle of Holden, where I studied and worked on the book of Revelation and came back and preached 42 messages on the book of Revelation. I'm not planning on preaching 42 messages on Texas, okay? Don't worry about that. The second sabbatical, I had the opportunity to go to Israel and participate in a prayer conference and a prayer tour and to spend some time with a missionary and a church that we were supporting over there, the Smith family and the Morning Star Fellowship, and see them before they got into their new facility and spend some time worshiping with them. The third sabbatical I took to Cape Hatteras and spent time working on a curriculum, writing a curriculum called Captain Bob's Swashbuckling Adventures on the Old Ship of Zion. And I came back and we used that for a couple of years with the Awana kids in the summertime to give the Awana workers a break. I went out there and became Captain Bob and went on some exciting adventures with our kids while the Awana workers had an opportunity to come in here. And Mark was the only one that didn't get a rest during that time. He worked during the during the year with the Awana and the youth, and then had to come and preach on Sunday nights. But anyway, we did that on the 3rd. So this was the 4th one, and it was a little bit different. This was a little bit more diverse, rather than being specific for writing a curriculum or studying the book of Revelation or doing a mission endeavor and prayer endeavor. This sabbatical, as given to you a couple of months ago and approved by you, was for a time of rest it was also for a time of sermon planning and sermon preparation. Now, realizing it's very difficult to prepare sermons when you don't have your resources with you. And I couldn't take my whole library with me and all the resources. So the sermon preparation was a little less, although I was able to do some of that while I was gone. The plan was for me to spend the month of March in West Texas, Texas, which is just north of Waco, at a place called Day Spring Campground Ministries. And the cost for this, somebody said, well, why are you giving the cost? Well, I want to be upfront and above board and accountable to you for what I did and what I spent. Part of that cost, the church gave about $3,000 from the Sabbatical fund that had been put aside and established for this purpose. $542.80 was used for the airline ticket to get out there and back from here to Austin, Texas and back. $1,964.79 for rental of a car. That may seem like a lot, but I had the car for 25 days, and I put quite a few miles on that car. Of course, the mileage wasn't included. That was unlimited mileage on that, and I appreciate Carol Brown for lining all this up. And then the Sabbatical Committee gave me an additional $1,000 for miscellaneous things, for food and miscellaneous things that had to come along in that process. So the total for that, I thought I had on here, there it is, was $3,507.59. So stayed pretty much within the monies that were donated by the church. Starting off was an interesting experience to begin with, mainly because I was the navigational director. That should be a big question mark in everybody's mind. There was a wreck on the interstate, and we weren't sure exactly where it was, but we knew it was down towards the Eflin area somewhere, and so Mark and I decided, Mark basically, since he was driving, to go 70. So I was the navigator to get him back on the right interstate and get him to the airport, which I did, only I got him on Interstate 85. And you can get to the airport from Interstate 85, but it's not easy. So we finally took the roundabout right and got back on I-40 and got to the airport in plenty of time for me to board the plane and to take off to Austin. And I arrived in Austin, Texas about 3:45 their time on Monday. And upon arriving there, you can see my little car down there in Austin, little star up there at West. I had to go to the rental booth to find a car. Now, I learned something while I was doing that. Number one, if you ever go to Austin, Texas, pack lightly. Or either listen to Mark. Now, I hate to admit that I should have listened to Mark, but he tried to offer me a suitcase with a roller and a handle. Well, I had a suitcase with rollers on it, and I thought it'd be fine. But I did not realize how far the airport was from the rental place. And I took that suitcase that weighed 243 pounds, well, maybe not quite that much, but it seemed like it, all the way over there, and I was huffing puffing the whole way. So I finally got there and got my car and headed to West. Did you see that little move there? My little car went right to West. It knew where it was going. Of course, it would have been a lot better if I had had a GPS that had some sense. I finally came to Day Spring Campground Ministries sign, and it was a welcome relief. After a 2.5-hour flight from Raleigh-Durham over to Austin, Texas, and getting in a car that I wasn't familiar with and going 80 miles an hour down the interstate, following the directions of a GPS that couldn't get its way out of a wet paper bag, I finally made it to Day Spring Campground Center and was grateful to turn in. And there's a picture of the campground. It's a sprawling 55 acres that actually belongs to the campground ministry. And it's a very unique camp. Most camps nowadays cost anywhere from $200 to $300 per person to go for a week of camp. And that puts it out of the range of a lot of kids, especially underprivileged kids in the city. But Lori and Larry Wymore had a vision for God and a heart for kids. And their vision was one that was brought out of and grown out of the experience of George Mueller and his orphanages in England, where he based his orphanage ministry on faith. And he said he wasn't going to ask anybody but God for funds. And so Lori and Larry operate under that system. They let God know what the needs are, but not people. And God supplies the need. And so in Texas, you're able to operate a camp for 2 nights and 3 days without having paid staff. You can operate it with volunteer staff. So that's what they do. They operate on Thursday, Friday night, and Saturday, half the day during the day, in order for the kids to get back home before nighttime. So 2 nights, 3 days, they're there with the gospel being presented to them day in and day out, and they have tremendous results, and it doesn't cost the kids anything. No child is turned away from their camp because people like you and I give monies to help them buy whatever is necessary, and they have staffed nurses. They have legitimate licensed nurses and others there. Larry Wymore just had knee surgery Monday to replace his knee, and the surgeon that did the work, one of the doctors, said he was interested in the work that he was doing. He said, I want to volunteer out there. He's in Waco, about 27 miles from the camp, and he wants to volunteer to help. That's the kind of people that are helping out in this area. But for my stay there, I stayed in the little house or the little mobile home there that you can see kind of in the middle, right in the back. This is a little bit closer view of the mobile home I stayed in, the living conditions there. Ethan was especially excited about my bedroom that had a picture of Jesus and little children on the wall. He liked that. And they say they're going to repaint that sometime. I hope they don't. But that was a very spacious, very nice area in which I could stay. They had have a tabernacle there, an area for where the kids meet. It's set up right now to seat 150 kids, but it has plenty of room for more chairs to be added to be able to minister. So can you imagine 150 junior high age kids or senior high? They have 2 weeks, one for each, filling that place and hearing about the gospel of Jesus Christ. Some of them for the first time. And 20 to 30 a week will make a decision for Jesus Christ, impacting their lives for Jesus Christ. But I want to show you something that's really impactful. When Larry laid out the plan for the platform area, he especially laid out the floor so that when you're standing behind the pulpit, you're preaching from the foot of the cross. Isn't that cool? You're preaching from the foot of the cross when you're sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ to those that are there with you. It is an amazing opportunity to be there. Right behind the tabernacle area, they have a walled off area that you can go around, is the seating area for the lunch, for the food, and they have tables on the other side as well, and they connects to a super nice kitchen that is industrial strength and lined up and everything, and they are there to share the ministry and to minister to those kids, and the dorm room is right behind that. Well, no trip to Texas is complete, especially the Waco area, unless you go to the silos at Magnolia Market. I didn't know this at the time, and I'm not sure, don't take this to the bank, but I was told by a resident there that Waco is the second highest destination place for tourists in America. The top place is Hawaii. The second place is Waco. And the reason for that is Magnolia Market and Chip and Joanna Gaines. If you've ever watched Fixer Upper on television, you know Chip and Joanna Gaines and what they've done. And they did a marvelous job. The silos are where they have their offices and printing shop and all kinds of things that they do in there for their corporation. But then they fixed up all around there just really nice. And that church over in the lower corner was built in 1894 in another part of the city, and was the Second Presbyterian Church, and was used during that time, but over the years had fallen into disrepair. Chip and Joanna bought it, disassembled it, and reassembled it on their properties, and now they have the inside. The picture on the left is looking from the rear up to the pulpit, and the other picture on the right-hand side is looking at from what the preacher would see, looking out into the congregation. And so it was really nice to go. There was a nice worshipful atmosphere. And you can't go there unless you go to Cottonland as well. Cottonland is a castle that the Chip and Joanna purchased. It was in a rundown condition and a really nice neighborhood. I can't imagine the neighborhood people allowing it to get in such disrepair. It's a really nice neighborhood, but it was started in 1890 by a stonemason, stone contractor, but was not finished till 1913 by a cotton tycoon in the area. And he built it and lived there for a while. They went in and refurbished it and made it to look like it would have in the 1913s, in the early 1900s. And you can't go in it right now. They just have it open on certain times. But it was an amazing thing to look from the outside. Well, that took care of the first week, and it was Sunday. And so it was time it was actually Saturday, so it was time for us to do something. So we took off again from West, and we drove up to Sulphur Springs. I went with my host up to Sulphur Springs to a Bible conference that they were hosting up there, or not, they were not hosting it, but they were guests. And quite honestly, I was a little nervous about going, and I didn't know anybody up there. I didn't know who the speakers were. I knew one guy that was supposed to come, and he ended up not coming. I'd heard of him, but he had some issues, and he couldn't be there. But when I got there, I found that New Beginnings Baptist Church that you see there in the lower corner is a Southern Baptist church. So I felt right at home. I was with Southern Baptists, and all the speakers were Southern Baptists. So I felt right at home. Some great men of God who were just right down to earth, and they preached and fed. And you can't imagine what it's like. You get preached to all the time, but when you're a preacher and you're constantly giving out, and you get the opportunity to receive and to get back in, it was such a refreshment to be there on that time. The sanctuary had just been freshly remodeled not too many years ago. They have a state-of-the-art Family Life Center. And that's a picture of Larry and Lori Wymore, my host at the campground. They were there at the dinner. But there were some incredible people there. Joy is the one on the left. And no, you're right. My left. You're right. Joy is on the right from your perspective. She is a dear prayer warrior, and you could just tell the love of Jesus radiated from her. And on the other side is Mary, who is the custodian for the church and keeps it in immaculate position. Both of those ladies were just the epitome of love and graciousness and care, and made me feel welcome. Well, Wednesday came, and it was time on Thursday for us to travel back to West. And so here we go back to West to get ready for the weekend. Now, when I talk about West Texas, you're looking at it. This is the main street of West Texas. If you've ever been to Rocky Mount, North Carolina, you know that the railroad track runs right down the middle of the street, and there's stores on one side in Edgecombe County and on the other side in Nash County. That's not the way it is here in West. That's what you get. What you see is what you get in West Texas. There is a street that goes down in the middle, kind of, called Oak Avenue, or Oak Street, and it has some buildings on there as well. There are a lot of bars there. This is a Czechoslovakian community, and so alcohol is nothing big for them. That's just normal in their lifestyle. So there are a lot of bars around there. On the other side, where that truck he's parked right in front of a railroad track. So the railroad runs down. There are a few stores on the other side, but not a whole lot. So there is a Czech-American restaurant, and I did eat there. Believe it or not, I ate at the Czech-American restaurant. Now, you know I like to live dangerously, and I'm very open to try new things. So I went into this Czech American restaurant, and I ordered an authentic open-faced roast beef sandwich. It was good, too. Big portion, along with French fries. I was living dangerously. But they have a museum there that is open on Thursday through Saturday, 10 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And it's surprising. You don't think it's going to be much from the outside, but the inside it's really interesting. There was in 1890, a man by the name of Thomas West came into that area, known then as Bold Springs, B-O-U-L-D, Springs, and he settled there and he opened a general store. He pondered over a name for the store that would be catchy and that people would remember, and so he came up with a name, West General Store. Isn't that creative? Isn't that catchy? He named it after himself. And so people began to bring goods to him, valuables, and say, listen, would you put this in your safe for me? Because we don't trust it just for people coming into our community, maybe breaking into our house. And so he decided that it would be a good idea to open a bank. Well, he pondered over a name, and guess what he decided to name it? West Bank. It worked so well for his general store. So after a few more enterprises, he opened a drugstore and a few more enterprises and named them all after himself. They decided to name the town West Texas. So that's how West Texas gets in the middle, kind of the middle, central part of Texas. Well, he finally got tired of the banking business and he sold his safe to a butcher in the area by the name of Nemick. Mr. Nemick had trained as a butcher, and he was very knowledgeable of meat and things related to meat. And he bought the safe. And when the museum acquired the safe from the Nemick family, the bottom portion was locked, and they were not given the combination to it. And so anyone that goes in today can try their luck at opening the combination because they have no idea what's behind it. It could be a fortune or it could be a bunch of dust. They have no idea what's in the lower part of the safe, and they don't want to damage the safe because of its historical nature by trying to force it open. Well, the safe has a history in it. After Nemick got it in 1930, somewhere in the 1930s, the butcher shop was robbed, and the robbers made off with a bag of money. But what they didn't know was the bag of money had a purple pack of dye inside. And so when they opened the bag of money and stuck their hand in to get the money, the purple pack exploded and got purple dye all over their hands and all over the money. Well, the money was useless at that point because everybody would have known it was stolen money. And, of course, their hands were stained for a long time with that purple dye. So they discarded the money in a ditch, and the money was found somewhat a little bit later and returned. And you can see one of the two of the dollar bills in the bag that they had at that time. But Nemick had a problem or situation that developed. He would ride the train to Fort Worth, which is about an hour and a half drive from West. I don't know how long it took him on the train, but he would ride the train to Fort Worth and buy cattle that had come in from all over and have it shipped back down to West. And once it got down to West, it was offloaded from the train, put in the pen, and then one of his sons, usually Ernest, had to take off from work and drive those cattle 2 miles down the road to the stockyard where they'd be slaughtered. Well, that left the butcher shop unattended or lack of staff for the better part of a day while he took care of all this. So Ernest was smart. He trained his horse Jim to do it. And so he trained Jim to go to the pen. They'd open the pen. Jim would lead the horse down Main Street, 2 miles south to the stockyard. He'd get the cattle to the stockyard, and he'd wait there, make sure none of them left, until Ernest or one of the guys from the shop made a quick trip down to the stockyard, opened the gate, the cattle would go in, Jim would come on back home. Can you imagine the spectacle of watching a riderless horse leading a herd of cattle down Main Street to the stockyard? Talk about your Judas goat. I guess he was the Judas horse. Well, this is a picture of Thomas West. Now, I don't know how old he was at this particular time, but when he was 26, he enlisted in the 19th Texas Cavalry, and it was exactly 161 years ago. It was on April the 2nd of 1862 that he enlisted in the cavalry, and he was listed at that time as being 5 foot 10 inches high and having blue eyes and brown hair. Now, wait for it, women. I know this is going to excite y'all to no end. West is equipped for your modern hairstyles. When you wanted a perm, you'd go sit in the barber chair over there, and they'd wash your hair, and then they'd hook you up to the perm machine. Get all those waves and curls just right, and then they'd plug it in just to make sure it worked. But then you had to go to the dryer, and you'd put your head under the dryer and get your hair nice and dry so the perm would take. I imagine that any man going by and looking in the beauty shop may have been scared off a little bit, thinking the aliens had arrived, looking at those women wearing the helmet. Well, of course, I had to go to the Texas Ranger Museum. You can't go without going to the Texas Ranger Museum, and it's filled with all kinds of guns and memorabilia and pictures of Texas Rangers and whatnot. And as I was sharing with some earlier, Ethan is an official junior Texas Ranger now. He is on the registry, he's on the list, he's got his badge, he's official, so be careful around him, you might get arrested. It was time for my second church experience, and so I decided to go to First Baptist Waco, which is about 27 miles from where I was. An incredible church. The architecture there on the outside is just gorgeous. It's like four-sided, and there are entrances on all the sides. It was just incredible to look at, and it's right across the street from Magnolia Market. So if you go to Magnolia Market, you look, and there's the church right there. That's how I was able to find it. The inside is just as gorgeous as the outside. You can see all the pipes there. The stage area is a little vacant because the Baylor students were on sabbatical, were on spring break, and so they weren't up there, so there was no orchestra chairs, but usually the area up there around the pulpit is filled with the orchestra, and they do a marvelous job of singing and sharing. The architecture around the top, you probably can't see it very well there, but the engravings, the sculpture around the balcony was just incredible. And their ceiling was just as gorgeous. It had some markings and crate work and all up there on the top. It was just out of this world. And the people were so friendly. One of the guys that was sitting there across the aisle from me ended up sitting right behind me. One of the ladies that was behind me was from Tennessee, and she came over, and she was a member there, and she called this guy John and said, "John, I want you to meet Pastor Bob," and introduced me. He was the dean of the seminary at Baylor University. Just as friendly as could be, and at the end of the service, he introduced me to his mom and dad sitting behind him. It made me want to go back the next Sunday. I didn't, but they gave me that warm welcome. Now, their guest bag was not all that it was cracked up to be. As I said this morning, they had some brochures in there, but they weren't as nice as ours, I don't think. And they had a coffee mug and a thing of coffee. That was it. No chocolate. Can you imagine? A guest bag with no chocolate? Oh, each his own, I guess. Well, it was time. The second week had come, and it was time for my big second trip. So I got in the car, and I decided that I was going to go to Fort Worth. I decided rather than make a 2-day trip, a 1-day trip to Amarillo, and then try to be fresh and excited and all to see Phyllis, I'd make it a 2-day trip. So I went to Fort Worth and then went on up to Wichita Falls and spent Monday night in Wichita Falls. On Tuesday morning, I drove on up. It was about a 3-hour trip on up to Amarillo, where I saw Phyllis, and then turned around and came back on Wednesday. Now, that was a trip I made all in one day to get back. But while I was there, I decided to stop about an hour and 20 minutes into the trip and look at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. Never been there before, and so this is what you see when you come on the campus, the main administration building, and off to the left of the building, to my left, is the building that you see on your right, the church music building, and on the other side is one of the men's residence halls, and it is huge. It is very large. The students were on spring break, so I didn't go around the campus or spend much time there. I just went there, and then I went into the main administration building, where in the dome they have pictures all around there of the presidents, past presidents and present president of the seminary. And the one that I was especially drawn to was the one of B.H. Carroll there on the right. And I had to send that back to Mark and tell Mark that that's what he would look like in 20 or 30 years. He said, "Oh, if I had that much hair." But he was the founder of the school, founded 118 years ago, and still in existence today, training men and women for the ministry. Of course, my main purpose for going up to Amarillo was to see Phyllis. You've seen that picture. Mark showed that to you earlier. Phyllis is doing pretty well. She has moments of forgetfulness like many of us do, and she's not as mobile as perhaps we would like for her to be, but she can get around in that wheelchair, but watch out. She'll run over you in a heartbeat if you get in her way, but she gets around pretty good with that, and she was very appreciative of the cards that I gave to her, 42, I believe, cards that came from the church here, and she was very appreciative of that, and looking forward to reading those the next day. I came back on Wednesday, as I mentioned, and I didn't show this earlier, but when you come back into West, you see these pictures on either side of the street going in, Oak Street going into town. These are on the interstate. As I said, it is the largest population of Czechoslovakian immigrants in the United States. That's where they settled, and they're still there in large numbers. And they have a very friendly time, but I've been told that they're not readily accessible to strangers who move in. They're okay to visitors coming in, but not as much to strangers. Well, that took care of that week, and the next week, or that Sunday, was time to find another church. So I'm off this time to Dallas, and I went up to Dallas. The traffic was very light going and very heavy coming back. I think every church got out at the same time. But I got there and decided to go to First Baptist Church, Dallas. On your right is the old sanctuary. On the left is the new worship center that's built in front of it. You can't really see. I think actually the worship center is on the back side of the church, that if you went around the block, you might be able to see the front part of the old church, but it's all been amalgamated in there into a massive 3,000-seat worship center. And right at the top part of the new building there, I don't know if you can see it or not, but that little black area, that's the worship center. And this other area is the entranceway that goes over to the parking garage. It's an amazing thing to see. This is the old sanctuary. It's kind of a three-piece. It may make you look kind of weird, but it's taken 3 pictures and kind of put them together to give you an idea of the sanctuary. It's still in use today for funerals, for weddings, and for the contemporary worship service. It's kind of hard to imagine contemporary worship in stained glass and pews and all that kind of stuff, but they have their worship there, and the guy comes and, well, I'll show you the organ in a minute, but this is their new sanctuary. And they have an orchestra up there. You can see a little white banister or railing in front of the orchestra. That actually goes all the way up to hide the orchestra so you can't see the orchestra at all. And when the orchestra starts playing, it comes down and reveals the orchestra. The choir is up behind there. You may not be able to see them, but the choir is right up there and high and lifted up. When the preaching started, the floor went down and the orchestra disappeared. So the orchestra floor goes down, the railing comes down. It's an amazing situation. Here are the organs, the old pipe organ on your right. And like I said, that's used for weddings and funerals, but the organ master goes in there every Wednesday night and plays it just to make sure that the pipes are all cleaned out and no cobwebs in there or dust or anything gets settled in there. So he goes in and plays it on Wednesday night. The other one, you see him over there in the main worship center playing the orchestra, playing there with the orchestra. One of the things that was really impressive to me was the baptismal pool. Instead of being behind the choir, because the choir is so high and lifted up, it's over to the right-hand side of the platform, which would be over here, and it looks like the brazen altar. It's huge, a brazen laver that they would have had at the temple. And the pastor and whoever's doing the baptismal service and the candidates come in from behind the stained glass window down there into the baptismal pool. And you might be able to see a little area right behind there that is glass, and that's where the people can stand and watch their family member being baptized. So it was just really an amazing situation to see that. And I'm just throwing this in for what it's worth. I know that when Curtis Oakley retired back in 1989, the church gave him a 1989 Ford truck. I think it might be possible or something to think about that when I retire, whenever that comes, that the church consider putting an elevator in between the office and the main level. I mean, W.A. got one. I'm just saying, W.A. Criswell got one, so it's a possibility. It has been done before, but he has his elevators. So it wasn't all fun and travels. It may have seemed that way, but during the time I was gone, I was able to read 3 books. One called out, dealing with ministry, going into full-time church-related ministry. A second book dealing with Jesus the King was a commentary on the book of Mark. And then I received one at First Baptist Dallas that was written by Dr. Jeffries on 18 Minutes with Jesus, which is a discourse on the Sermon on the Mount. So I was able to do that. I'll read those 3 books. Also, when I went there, part of my sabbatical planning or purpose was to do some sermon planning, and that's what my sheet looked like. I had 3 of those, one for Sunday morning, one for Sunday night, and one for Wednesday night. By the time I left, this is what my Sunday morning sheet looked like, and this was Sunday night and Wednesday night. Now, there are still some vacancies in there that still have to be worked on, but it's a lot further along than what it was when I went, so I appreciate that a great deal. Just as a kind of a summary, this is the area that I traveled while I was in Texas. A number of trips to Waco and west and things of this nature. You may think that sabbaticals are a waste of time and a waste of resources for the church, but I assure you that it is the best investment that you can make in the life of your pastor and staff. The folks in West were used by God, specifically those in Dayspring Campgrounds Ministries, to refresh, renew, and encourage me beyond anything imaginable. You can imagine if you're constantly in the kitchen cooking and you never get time to sit down and enjoy a meal, it gets old after a while. And that's kind of like sermon preparation, week after week after week, giving out, and not being able to take back in at the same level you're giving out. And I was able to do that. They ministered to me. They made it available for me, and I am grateful to you for that. And I thank you for doing that and hope that you'll continue this process of funding sabbaticals for future years, for future staff, and for future ministers and pastors that come. One of the things that I did spend some time on, and I won't talk about that now, I'll present that later, is plans for retirement. And I'll just say this right now, for some of you, you're going to be very disappointed, but at this moment, I don't have any plans to retire anytime soon. Now, I know that may be disappointing to some of you, but I don't have any plans. They're still in the making. And I'm still working on it, and I'll have a presentation to present to the deacons, and then we'll present to you at some point. But God has shared with me through the years that he wanted me to, where he wanted me to serve. Every church, I could spend a lot longer than you want to listen, telling you how God led me to every church that I have served and how he let me know when it was time to leave that church. And I just don't believe that it's up to me to decide when I'm going to retire. That's God's job. He called me, he's equipped me, and I think he'll let me know when the time comes. But just so that you can see a couple of other things there, kind of a hodgepodge of pictures. Up in the top corner there is one of the original Conestoga wagons that brought the people into West Texas originally. Down in the middle, you can't see it real well, but there's a picture of the old town in 1895, I think it was, of West. And how many of you have ever had to chase chickens on the farm? Some of you have done that? Well, I don't know whether you had one of these or not, but you might have really enjoyed this little gizmo right here. That's a chicken catcher. Any of you have a chicken catcher? We have one that had a chicken catcher over here. Well, he can tell you how they work. So they had a chicken catcher. These are some of the examples of how the Czechoslovakians dress, and some of you may be able to see down in the lower bottom corner there the old treadle sewing machine that they had a picture of. Some of you may have one of those. My mom had one and used it for years and years and years. But that was some of the Czechoslovakian dress. Here's the Texas Ranger Museum. You can see a stuffed horse. I don't think that's silver up there, but there are some guns and that were used by Bonnie and Clyde, and pictures of them, and the handcuffs that came from their arrest. Down in the bottom lower corner, somebody was asking about Cordell Walker. Over on the left-hand side over here on y'all's left is Walker Texas Ranger hat and guns. And on the other side is some other memorabilia from there. They had the Texas Rangers, the Lone Ranger there as well. This was a llama herd that I went by every day. That was close to the boys' reformatory there. So I had to take some pictures of some llamas. And the longhorn herd, I was going to buy a house and buy this longhorn herd for Ethan to take care of, but Stephanie wasn't going to let him come and stay with me, so I just let somebody else have those. But that's the longhorn herd. And there's Parson Bob, the circuit riding preacher, looking for Trigger. If I could ever find Trigger, I could get back on the post again and on the circuit and ride off into the sunset. Thank you for allowing me to share with you this sabbatical. I hope it's helped you to know what went on a little bit better, of the fact that it wasn't just rest, but I was able to get a lot of rest that I needed, and that God used you and the people that I was around to refresh and energize and strengthen me. And I'm now ready to ride off into the sunset whenever I find Trigger. So would you